Alright, okay, so hello dears! Ayan. So welcome to another pre-recorded lecture in our class in Immunology and Serology. And for this lecture, what we're going to discuss now is our last laboratory activity in IS, and that is your Salmonella serology. So the serology of Salmonella, okay? A bacteria, yes. So may mga bacteriology konti. So this is our last activity na yun, lab activity. But for the lectures, I think dapat tayo mga miscellaneous topics. Hopefully makaya pa sa time and maka-lecture po gamay. But for this lecture, this is our last lab activity. Oh my gosh, last na yun. Wow, very sentimental chart. Okay, but anyway, alright, so for this lecture, we're going to focus now on the serological tests to diagnose your Salmonella infections. Okay, alright. Now for Salmonella, again, just a little background, bacteriology konti. Okay, so family is of course Enterobacteriaceae. Ayan, please pronounce it as Enterobacteriaceae. Okay, that's the family. And the tribe is Salmonelli. Okay, so it's part of the Salmonelli tribe. Of course, your Enterobacteriaceae, the best. Mga biochemical tests, can remember pa ba? Yes, okay. Alright. General characteristics, of course, it's gram-negative, facultatively anaerobic bacilli that morphologically resemble your other enteric bacteria. Of course, your Enterobacteriaceae, they look the same. Most of them, they look the same. Gram-neg, facultative na mga bacteria. Okay, for culture, of course, for culture media, for Salmonella, di ba marami? You have BSA, you have SSA, you have XLD, you have HEA, hectoin, enteric. So these are all Salmonella and Shigella, di ba? Differentiate the two. Salmonella, Shigella na mga agar. Okay, so for culture, iyahang growth, clear, colorless, non-lactose fermenting colonies with or without black centers, which would depend on the medium. But because again, it's a non-lactose fermenters, non-lactose fermenter ng Salmonella, of course, it's colorless. Non-lactose fermenters, and usually they produce H2S, di ba? H2S producer sila. That's why they could have black centers, depending again on the medium. Alright? Okay, sana na-remember pa to. Oh my gosh, bakte. Okay, alright. Biochem characteristics, again, non-lactose fermenters. Indole VP pan urease negative. H2S positive except for Salmonella paratyphi A, and it is inhibited by potassium cyanide. Okay, so medyo mga negative ang mga Salmonella, but most of the time, H2S producers na sila. Okay, pero mas negative ang Shigella, di ba? Recall, Shigella is biochemically inert. Siya ang bacteria that is known to be biochemically inert. Inert, meaning negative iya ang most of iyang biochemical results. Negative ang iyang most of its biochemical results. Nako, sana naman, na-remember pa to. Oh my gosh. Okay, pang ano hata mo sa inyong bacte teachers last sem. Okay, alright, so here are your biochemical results in culture DI. For Maconchi agar, of course, colorless, non-lactose fermenting colonies. For your SSA, of course, it's colorless, non-lactose pa rin, pero with black centers because your SSA detects H2S production. And lastly, of course, your BSA, you have black colonies with metallic sheen. Basta mga black, usually, or produce siya of H2S yun, produce like black center colonies nila. Okay, sana na-remember pa. Okay, alright, Salmonella. Okay, now, the genus, they have 3 biochemically discrete species before. Okay, of course, your Salmonella enteritidis, Salmonella cholera suis, and Salmonella typhi. But this time, through genetic studies, they have only 2 major species talaga, which is Salmonella enterica, which has 6 subtypes. Subspecies, you have S. enterica, subspecies enterica, S. enterica, subspecies salame, arizone, diarizone, hutine, and indica. And the last species is Salmonella bongori, which is a rarely isolated species named after the town of Bongor in Chad, Africa. So your Salmonella enterica, dira na nakasulod imuhang S. typhi, S. paratyphi. Okay, but generally, initially, yun ang first 3 species kanina sila, Enteritidis, Cholera suis, and S. typhi. Okay, alright. Now, the 2 species designation supported, and nearly all former species have been placed as serotypes or serovars na below S. enterica, subspecies enterica. So, major serotypes or serovars of clinical importance is your S. enterica, subspecies enterica, serotype, typhi. Muna siya ang Salmonella typhi in short, okay? But ang complete niya is Salmonella enterica, subspecies enterica, serotype, typhi. So, sa serotypes na sila mo differ, okay? Alright, and you have serotype paratyphi and serotype cholera suis, Salmonella cholera suis. Okay, alright, ayan. Now, we go now to its antigenic structures. Because again, that's what we're looking after put in serological tests for Salmonella. Your Salmonella possess antigens similar to those of your Enterobacteriaceae, okay? And I hope na remember pa ni, based on its structures of bacteria. You have the somatic O antigen, which is found in the cell wall, because it's based again on the German word "onne", that's why it's O, di ba? Na-mention ako ng isang bacteriology students last sem. Okay, heat stable siya na lipopolysaccharide. You have the flagellar H, which is a German word for Houch. Muna siyang H, diba? Kana masakitan ka, Houch. Charot. I-push na ako rin na joke. Anyway, heat labile antigens, phase 1 ang specific and phase 2 non-specific. So na phase 1 na H antigen, which is the specific one, and phase 2 non-specific. Phase 2 H antigen, which is non-specific. And lastly, you have the capsular K or VI antigen, which stands for capsule sa German. That's why it's letter K. It's heat labile pa rin antigen, polysaccharide capsular antigen in S. typhi and some S. cholera suis. Okay? Alright, so these are the antigens or virulence factors, okay? Or mga antigen structures na itong gina-look after when we are testing for Salmonella sa serology. Okay. Alright, so again, a heat stable rhizomatic O, which is in the cell wall. Flagellar H and capsular K are all heat labile. Okay. Alright. Ayan. Sige. So the O and H antigens, these are the primary antigenic structures used in serologic grouping. So if you kato mga determine the serotype typhi, serotype paratyphi, muna siya ang ginagamit, the O and H antigens. And few strains na may possess the K antigen, capsular K, or the VI antigen. Okay. Important in identifying Salmonella typhi ang K antigens because your Salmonella typhi has the K antigen and they play a significant role in preventing phagocytosis of the organism because of the capsule, diba? That's one of the main roles of your capsule. It prevents phagocytosis. Okay. Alright. The VI antigen, it often blocks the O antigen during serological typing, so that's why you should heat it. Okay. So therefore, if you are testing for serological grouping, no, if you want to determine if ang Salmonella ba, what is its serotype, you first heat it, okay, to disable, okay, or to prevent the VI antigen from blocking the O antigen, which is used now for serological grouping ang O antigen. Okay, so you remove it by heating ang VI antigen. Because what we're looking for, if serological grouping if you want to determine kung unsay serotype sa imong Salmonella, you use the O and H antigen. So that's why ato sang i-heat ang sample to prevent the VI antigen from blocking the O antigen. Because ang O antigen ang needed for serologic grouping. Okay? Alright, ayan. But for other tests like serological tests, not serological grouping, pwede lang dili i-heat, okay? Because you're looking for the other antigens. Apil po ng K antigen dito. Okay? Alright, for serologic grouping na to siya. For serological grouping. Okay. Alright. Now for transmission, how do we transmit or how do we get Salmonella? It's the ingestion of food or ingestion of the organism found in your food, water, and milk contaminated with human or animal excreta. That's why, di ba, sa eggs, Salmonella, di ba, for salmonellosis, makuha siya from chickens daw, yes. I'm not sure if sa egg yolks ba, or sa egg shells, di ba, namin mga tae pwede na mga egg shells or eggs na na-covered sa tae sa imuhang chicken. So that's why, make sure na imo siyang i-wipe og tarong yung mga eggs, dira. You like chicken eggs, ha? Bakal eggs. Wipe your eggs din naman, pero chicken eggs. Wipe your chicken eggs, disinfect them properly, ang outer, because again of possible contamination from excreta nila. Okay? But the mode of transmission of your Salmonella is ingestion of the organisms found in your food, milk, or water. Okay. Alright. Your Salmonella organisms, they infect various animals that will serve as reservoir and sources of human infections. Salmonella serotypes typhi and paratyphi, no known animal reservoir, and infections can occur only in humans. Okay. So carriers are often the source of infection. So ang Salmonella typhi and paratyphi, it's usually from human origin yun. So if nagka-Salmonella typhi ka or paratyphi, then likely nakuha mo na siya from a human carrier. Okay? Alright. Ayan. Sige. So for clinical infections in humans, salmonellosis may occur in several forms. You have acute salmonellosis, gastroenteritis or food poisoning, characterized by vomiting and diarrhea, attributed primarily to poultry, milk, eggs, and egg products. So dili siya typhoid fever, not necessarily. It's salmonellosis. It could be other species of salmonella. Okay? Not, diba? Because typhi and paratyphi, they have no known animal reservoir. So they are coming from humans yun, ang typhi and paratyphi. And for typhoid fever, it's caused by Salmonella typhi, and enteric fever is also caused by the other Salmonella serotypes. So it's prolonged fever, bacteremia, involvement of the RES or your liver, spleen, intestines, and mesentery, and dissemination to multiple organs. And diba, characteristic stools sa imuhang typhoid fever, ano sa to? Press the buzzer. Na-remember pa ba sa inyong AUBF or para? It's pea soup. Ayan, Rashad, sabaw. Okay. Pea soup, characteristic stool for typhoid fever. Okay. Alright. So again, it's more specific caused by Salmonella typhi. Okay. But your other serotypes of Salmonella, they can cause enteric fevers like press, like sakit mutian and all that. Alright. But for typhoid fever, it's really caused by Salmonella typhi. But then itself, typhoid typhi. Okay. Alright. So intense sa iyahang involvement, fever, pwede siya mag-bacteremia, and even involve your RES or your liver, and can even lead to multiple organ failure. Okay. Alright. Ayan. Now, non-typhoidal bacteremia, prolonged fever and intermittent bacteremia. So there is bacteria in your blood mismo, and it's usually associated with the serotypes typhi, murium, typhi, paratyphi, and cholera suis, non-typhoidal bacteremia. And carrier state, it's carrier state, by the name itself, you have, or the person has Salmonella, but he or she doesn't experience any symptoms, okay? So they recover from the infection, and now they harbor the Salmonella within their body, especially in the gallbladder, okay? In the gallbladder now. And it becomes a site of chronic carriage, and the organism is continuously and intermittently shed in the feces because that is just a gallbladder. And this person, can I remember mo, Ani, this is Typhoid Mary. Ayan, si Typhoid Mary. Ang complete name, si Mary Mallon. Ayan, very popular si Ate Gore. Ayan. So Mary Mallon was known to spread typhoid fever in the early 1900s, if I'm not mistaken. She was a cook, okay, sige siya balin-balin ng balay. Okay, so cook siya. So she was a cook to mga rich people, rich families. And then, kung asad yun siya, okay, kung asad yun siya na family, kato na family magdaot yun, sige, magkalibanga, maginana. Because again, it was later found out that she was a carrier of Salmonella, okay, and it resided in her gallbladder, okay. So, wala siya proper hygiene, so diba, so basin ikan siya nalibang, hindi siya maghugas, then magluto siya, so of course, the organism will be transferred to the food, and then eaten by the family, and then they got sick. Okay, and Typhoid Mary Mallon, nakawatch ko siyang video, not yung video, I think, I'm not sure if BuzzFeed or Vox. Basta video that made a documentary, or parang short primer on Mary Mallon. Sige siya palit-palit, sige siya sige po siya makawala, no, kay kanang i-alert ang mga health officials, ang mga police ato na time. So makuha nila si Mary Mallon, and then makagawas gyapon siya, and then ayang buhaton kay i-change ang name niya, dili na Mary Mallon. Mo-change siya og another identity, and then makasulod gyapon siya og balay, and then still the same scenario, magkasakit tong tagbalay, and then makuha na pud siya, idakpo na pud siya, makulong, makagawas na pud siya, inana pa. And then change identity and all until namatay siya sa prison. Okay, si Mary Mallon, yes. If you want to read about her or watch the video, nana siya sa YouTube, just search about it, nana good. Okay, but yeah, siya ang very popular na carrier sa Salmonella. Early 1900s, yes, nag-spread siya og kababalagan, nag-spread siya og fear, nag-spread siya og sayang attacks, joke lang. Nag-spread siya Salmonella, yes. And nag-harbor daw, it was found out that the Salmonella lived in her gallbladder. Ayan, okay. Mary Mallon or Typhoid Mary. Okay, alright. Now, for serologic grouping, as we mentioned, Once an isolate is biochemically identified as Salmonella, we then determine its serotype or serovar, di ba? Using your O antigen or O serogroups. You're using the somatic O antigen. And we perform that for confirmation if you want to know if unsang urea ang serotype. Okay, di ba? Because we mentioned that you have only two major species. You have Salmonella enterica and Salmonella Salmonella bongori. But Salmonella enterica has subtypes. You have, di ba, S. enterica, subspecies enterica. And the most popular, or the ones that cause infection, typhi and paratyphi, are serotypes under Salmonella enterica, subspecies enterica. That's why we need to perform serological grouping. Okay, so based on the common O antigens, Salmonella may be placed into major groups. 60 groups exist, however, and 98% of human isolates belong to serogroups A through G. So marami. Okay, because there are different mga antigens. Okay, alright. And if an isolate is suspected of being one of these three serotypes, Salmonella typhi, paratyphi, cholera suis, it must be biochemically identified and serologically confirmed. Okay, because again, we want to make sure if it's really the ones that can cause intense infection or katulad nila lang mga other Salmonella species. Okay? Alright, so if it's Salmonella typhi, paratyphi, or cholera suis, we perform biochemical testing and importantly, serological tests. Okay. And the H antigen or flagellar H, di ba? Either O and H antigen na gamitan for serological grouping. We perform it it is performed in mga state or reference laboratories for epidemiologic information. So it's for epidemiology. Okay. Alright. So for serological grouping, we perform using the slide method. So we make a bacterial suspension from a pure culture, and then we get a culture, di ba? Colonies from pure culture, and then immersed in sterile saline. And then a slide with wells or a regular slide lang with circles marked with a wax pencil is prepared and labeled accordingly. So you perform, if you don't have wells, you use slides. Okay, so slides, then I circles, and then you label that with the proper label. Okay, alright. So one drop of anti-sera is placed on the glass slide or in the label slide, and then bacterial suspension. And then if there is agglutination, then it means that that bacteria has a particular antigen. Okay, so ayan. Okay, so example, this is to detect if na ba siya O antigen and kani H antigen. Okay. So you put the anti-sera here, so anti-O and anti-H. And then you add also the bacterial suspension. So bacteria. So if mag-glutinate ni o positive, it means that bacteria has the O antigen. And if kani siya positive po, so meaning the bacteria has the H antigen. Okay. Ayan. Okay. Alright, so that's for serological grouping. Because again, O antigen and H antigen is what we use for serological grouping. So the principle is agglutination. Okay. Alright. Perform best specifications mga you need to follow. The colony should be from a non-selective media such as sheep's blood agar, but TSI or MAC can be used for presumptive serologic identification. Because non-selective, we don't want any mga, other culture media, di ba? You have mga inhibitors, you have mga reagents that were added that could interfere with the test. Okay, so it's best that we perform it from a non-selective media. Okay, alright. Anti-sera kits usually consist of a polyvalent, meaning daghan siya na antibodies, A through G, VI, and individual anti-sera for serogroups A, B, C1, C2, D, E, and G. So, muna siya mga anti-sera. Okay, so if kanya siya anti-sera, it contains the A serogroups, unsa may mga sulod atong A serogroups. Okay, and then B, C, C1, C2, D, etc. Okay, so A through G. Alright. Okay. And if there is agglutination with a VI anti-sera, as I mentioned, di ba, kailangan if VI anti-sera, it can interfere with your O and H antigen. If ni-agglutinate siya sa VI anti-sera, it means that the bacteria has the VI anti-sera, the VI antigen, sorry. So you need to heat the suspension at 100 degrees Celsius for 10 minutes to inactivate the capsular K or capsular VI antigen. So once cooled, the suspension is then retested for anti-sera A to G. Okay, so kani siya okay. So kanina siya na wells, sayo siya. Okay. Alright, but that's an example lang. Pero here that we're talking about serological grouping, So sa slide pala, okay, so you label the slides. For example, you're testing for A serogroup ba, B, example G, and then the VI, capture antigen. So you then add, of course, the anti-A, anti-sera. For serogroup ha, ayaw kalibog din siya sa blood type. Okay, anti-B, and then anti-G. Okay. Or kating mo ang anti-sera na polyvalent, meaning na dito tanan. Okay? And then if mo-agglutinate siya here, okay, so example, agglutinate, pag add mo sa bacterial suspension, it means that it's part of the A serotype or serogroup. Okay? And then if mo-agglutinate po sa VI, diba, it means that you need to heat the sample because the VI antigen will react, okay, or will interfere with your O antigen. Okay? Alright, ayan. So that's how you perform the serological grouping. Okay. And the results based on the White, Kaufman, Lay minor scheme. So siya ang muli siya ang imong basihan for serological grouping. For Salmonella paratyphi A, it's under the serologic group A. For Salmonella paratyphi B, it's under B, the serologic group. Paratyphi C is under C1 and Cholera suis is also under C1, na serogroup. And Salmonella typhi, which is what we're looking for or what's really important that can cause human infections, it's under serologic group D1. Okay, so it's in the group D1. Okay, that's for serological grouping. Because again, a lot of Salmonella, they have their own serogroups. Okay, and each serogroup has their own serotype. Okay, or serovar. Okay, and your Salmonella typhi is under serogroup D1. Okay, alright. Okay. Now for the next video, ayan, we'll continue now with the laboratory diagnosis na for Salmonella infections. Kato siya dear, kato serological grouping, it's mostly for confirming lang yun kung kinsa ni siya na organism through serological grouping. Okay, so agglutination. The White, Kaufman, Lay minor scheme, kato siya. Okay, and that's agglutination. But for now, for the next video, we'll look now into diagnosis yun for Salmonella infections. Okay? Alright, and I'll see you on the next video.